5 reasons why you must evaluate your community projects every time and what can happen if you don't. Sorry about that. Can you just bear with us a moment? We've got some technical problems. Okay. Okay then, are we ready? I apologise for that. Welcome to Evaluating for Success. 5 reasons why you must evaluate your community projects every time and what can happen if you don't. Where you will discover why evaluating your projects will improve your performance, increase your credibility and help you raise funds for your next project. So before we start, I just want to... Excuse me a moment, sorry. There are 2 of us in administrative mode and we can hear everything that's happening with the second administrator. And I'm just wondering, Karen, can you please...
I'm not typing, it's the chair.
Okay, all right then. So I'm sorry about this. So tell me a story. And I want you to think about perhaps last year, once upon a time, and you were involved in a really worthwhile project. A project that made a difference to at least one person, or a group of people, or even in fact a whole community. Now, can you think of such a project? There were some really good stories happening, some really good happily ever afters. Or it's a project that you could have done so much more if you'd had the time, or if you'd had the resources, or if you'd had the opportunity. But when it came to it, the project ended, and that was it. The money was gone, the funding finished, or you'd reached the deadline, and that was the end of the project. And you felt a little bit frustrated because there was so much more you can do. 6 months down the line, you're talking to me and you're telling me how wonderful or worthwhile the project was. But it was in your reply, I said to you, prove it. Could you prove everything that you were trying to tell me about the difference that your project was making? So this webinar is for you if you're running or planning to run a community project, or if you want to know how well your project is travelling to achieve the outcomes that you're expecting. Have you ever been involved in a project and at the end you weren't sure what to do next? Or do you want to know the basics of project evaluation? Now, as you can see from this picture, a project journey rarely travels in a straight line to the destination. And the fun part of it is to figure out why. What changed along the way? Okay, so my name is Pat Cross, from the Community Entrepreneur, and I was keen to deliver this webinar for a number of reasons. Now, I am an experienced project manager. I've even designed project management training and delivered it both in the UK and in Australia. But I've also been a member of a statewide training and mentoring team for evaluating community projects across Victoria in 2010 and up through to 2013. And so that perked my interest in evaluation and the importance of it. But I couldn't have really known how much that would hit me in the face until I was writing a grant application for a project, for the next iteration of a project that had been running for 3 years. And during that 3 years, the people who had been delivering the project hadn't evaluated the project at all. So we had no idea of the need. We didn't have any evidence about the specific needs of that particular client group that we were proposing to write an application about. And it was at a time between census years. It was 2011 when the 2011 census had just been done. So we wouldn't expect some real good data until 2013. And you couldn't really use data from 2006 because that data would have been at least 5 years out of date. So we were stuck trying to write an application for a project that could have been so different had these people been collecting systematic evidence of participation and the difference that their project was making. And we had to wait another 18 months, 12 to 18 months before we got the opportunity to resubmit. And in that time period, they spent a lot of time collecting local data and evidence. So that really got my interest in evaluation and how important it is, especially today, applying for government grants, where there seems to be an even higher need to be able to articulate facts and figures. So here I am today to share with you why it is important to evaluate your community projects and what can happen if you don't. And also to give you some guidelines on what project evaluation might look like. So again, look, just to give you an idea of what I've done, I mentioned that I was involved in a project evaluation team over a period of about 3 to 4 years. We were looking at a tool called Measuring Impact. Also, I've been involved in evaluating projects in a number of community areas such as aged care, e-learning, energy efficiency, multiculturalism, and one of my favourite evaluation projects was the one about parents returning to learning. So let's start with exactly what is project evaluation. Now, project evaluation is systematic and objective assessment of an ongoing or completed project. The two key words there are systematic and objective, because you can get so passionately involved in your project, but you do need to be able to stand back and be able to do some measurement objectively and systematically. So you may be asking questions at the beginning, same questions in the middle and same questions at the end, so that you can get some consistency of data change. And the aim is to determine the relevance and level of achievement of project objectives, development, effectiveness, efficiency, impact and sustainability. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the webinar. And this is probably the best project evaluation explanation of what it is, and this was the International Labour Organization. So let's have a look at 5 reasons why you must evaluate your community projects every time. Well, the first reason is, how do you know you've achieved what you set out to achieve? You know, did you achieve the outcomes you expected? Was the need real? And if you didn't, why not? And what was the difference to your expectations? Did the target audience react the way you wanted them to? Did your partners put in the right amount of effort? Did the project team have the right skills, time or resources? And did you get enough support from senior management even within your own group? Were there any external factors, economic, environmental, policy changes that directly impacted on the project that you hadn't foreseen before the project started? And really, it's about, was there a need for a project in the first place? It might seem a good idea, but you probably would find that if there wasn't a need, you're not going to achieve what you think you are setting out to achieve. Okay, so how do you know that the project has made a difference if you don't evaluate? Now here, change isn't just about bums on seats. Even though the data crunchers are very much about getting figures, we know working within community that the best information you can get is qualitative data. And how do you put a measurement on qualitative data? There are ways to do that, but that's the first question people ask. Oh, our project isn't one that's just about getting data, and that's correct, but you can use qualitative data to get your message across, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Were there any changes to knowledge, to attitudes, skills and behaviours? And those are some of the qualitative data that you will be looking for. I mean, how do you measure attitudes? How do you measure behaviours? There are ways to do that. Were you effective in supporting the change? Change may happen anyway. So did you play a role in that change happening? Was it coincidental? And can you look back and identify what changed and what caused it to change? So if you can evaluate and actually clarify that your project actually did make a change and it wasn't just a coincidence because something else was happening at the same time, then you're collecting that evidence that when somebody says later, prove it, you'll be able to say, this is the information, this is the evidence. All right, this is the favourite one, you know, the funding body or your management says so. So they say, when you put in an application for funding, or if you've been asked by your committee to run a project and you may be told you must evaluate this, and certainly you'll find that in funding submissions. And they're looking for a strategy that will show that you are being systematic in evaluating how successful your project has been. And what they'll want to know is, did you achieve their outcomes? That's their key priority. They are looking to see that you will put an application and say, these are the outcomes that we want to achieve, these are your outcomes, and they want to see that the project that you have delivered is working towards delivering their outcomes. And if you haven't, your project may be going in a completely different way altogether, and therefore it's not going to be eligible, it's not going to remain the project that they wanted, and you could run into some problems with funding. The funding body, was the project worthwhile to them? And they'll be looking at the efficiency, the effectiveness. Is the project going to be sustainable so that there'll be some long-term benefits from the project that you're running? Again, you know, are they going to get return on investment? And the other thing to bear in mind, if you are in a project where there is a funding body associated with this, and they may actually be, they'll hire their own evaluation of the program from which you've drawn down the funding. And I would say, don't rely on that as being a way to demonstrate your evaluation, because what they will be evaluating is the bigger picture. They will be evaluating across every single project in that funding stream. They'll be looking at data aggregated. So, and you may also find that you will have to, especially now with government funding, there may be some stringent guidelines around evidence that government wants you to collect. It's more like buns on seats, how many people participated, how many groups participated, etc., etc. Again, don't rely on that as being your sole evidence of evaluation. Yes, the data is good and it's a strong indicator, but we all know that the best work that you're doing is demonstrated by the effects that it has on people. And if you can capture that evidence, then that is going to be almost as strong and can be used in different ways, not just for the purpose of gathering data that will then go into a big picture and you just become a number. So it's important, even if there is a national or a bigger evaluation program around the projects that you are, the funding stream that you are involved in, it's very important that you evaluate at your own local level, because you're going to get some data that the bigger guys are just going to completely miss because it's not within their scope. And then when you are responding to the need because the funding body has said so, and you are looking to achieve their outcomes, you've got your own outcomes as well. So it's always important that you capture evidence that will actually lead to demonstrating the outcomes for your own organisation, your own community group, and these outcomes are closer to home for you, so you can use these outcomes as leverage to look at more funding. Okay, the fourth reason why you must evaluate is because you want more funding. Going back to the example that I was talking about earlier, yes, these guys wanted more funding. They knew there was a need because the project was led to that. It was a foundation project. It was a project, it was a pilot project, and it was only getting going. It had taken so long to get going, and you needed more funding to carry it on for at least 1 or 2 years further down the line, so that you would get a whole long-term outcomes of responding to a need within the community. So if you're evaluating your project, you will know there's going to be a need, so you can gather the evidence so that you can then apply for more funding. And it could be that the funding body may not fund more of the same, but you will be able to determine that, okay, we're taking this project this far, but there is a different tweak to the need, and we need to do something a little bit different, and that's fine. Then you can again use that initial evidence to back up your argument as to why you need further funding. Your good work needs to continue. As I mentioned, sometimes these are pilot programs, and these pilot programs can lead to mainstreaming. So if you're evaluating your project, you've got the evidence then to lobby. Perhaps it could be a youth project, and it's a youth project that may be adopted across the region, across the state, across the country. So if you can get the evidence of how successful your project was, then you can use that in an enterprising way to argue for it to be mainstreamed, at least locally or regionally. And as I said, sometimes they do get picked up nationally, and it's usually a small project where there's some good evidence of the outcomes attached to it. And look, you can't rely on not so readily available data. As I mentioned, if you are applying for a project and it's between 10 years, a 5-year cycle of ABS data, census data, you might not be able to rely on evidence that's 5 years old, even 6 years old, because it takes some time for information to come through. So you can't so easily readily rely on national data, and of course national data or state or regional data sometimes actually doesn't really apply to the local data. So you need to collect data that's relevant within your own community. And of course you want evidence to support your claims for more funding. That's the underpinning rationale. And the fifth reason why you must evaluate your projects is because people move on. New priorities in government, for example, or local government even. I do hear of projects which have been run in a local government area. Come the end of the financial year and the project is finished, and the project, and the report is given to local government, and then that's it. It feels like it's just been shelved. And this can happen, this feeling can happen in state government or wherever, funding body, because new priorities come along. Government agendas change, local government agendas change. And so it tends to be that they forget about the project that's just been delivered. And over time, people move on. So the contact that you had in local government, in a funding body or wherever, and it could even be within your own organisation if you're just doing a systems project, a processes project, and you've got a new committee who comes along and they say, we don't want to focus on this anymore, we've got new priorities, and then you tend to forget all that work that you've done, and you want to the information that comes out of that, and it just feels as though it's just got shelved. And because people have moved on, people forget that you did it in the first place, and then you end up with this cycle thinking, and then people go back and think, oh, wouldn't it be a good idea if we did this? And this could be something that you did 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And in fact, when in one job I was in, and we were looking at say a project on literacy, I would actually go back to reports going back 20 years ago, because the cycle seemed to be as much as 20 years. And I could go back to something that had been evaluated 20 years ago, and I could look at what the data that came out from that, not just the data, but the story that he was telling me. And I was able to use that information to put together the guidelines for new projects that we were going to put out 20 years later. So reinventing the wheel is actually quite common. And so if you evaluate your project and things move on, but you've got the evidence there, 5 years later, you can go back, or somebody can go back, because you may have moved on yourself, can go back, look at that project, and be able to say, oh, I can take this evidence here, take this information, and it's going to be very valuable in this project that we're going to run today. And then, of course, people move on, but there needs to be a record of your project's effectiveness, so that somebody can go back and they can check, and they can look at the way that you delivered the project, and it might have been delivered in a really good way, and it was, and it did, because 5, 6 years later, that the outcomes of that project were actually very, very good, because the outcomes may have been longer term outcomes that you would have noticed 3 or 4 years down the line. So it's good to go back to that original project and see how it was done, so that you could then do something similar and keep the momentum going. So let's think about evaluating community projects. And look, community projects are mostly about measuring change. And we're talking about measuring social change, economic change, environmental change, cultural change. These are the changes that happen in the communities. Yes, you can run a project which may be a systems or process project, and that's sort of like a systems change, but mostly in the community, the ones that we like to deliver are the warm and fuzzy ones. I call the warm and fuzzy projects, the ones that actually you can see, you can get really good feedback, that they've made a difference, you've made a positive difference in your community. And these differences will have impacts on individuals, on partners, on groups and communities. Now, an impact is a consequence of the outcome that you've wanted. And so you might not know, or you could say that this person has, and we'll talk about this, but this person might have something easy for me, done a course in a healthy social course, and the outcome of that is that they've now become more active in their community group, and the impact of that is that you could be that they're more happier, their families are happier at home, because these people are now happier because they've got something to do and they feel valued in their community group. So that's got a spin-off at home, or they might actually find that the impact of this confidence that they've developed might be that they will also actually be looking, got a part-time job that they never have thought about before. So an impact actually takes the outcome to the next level, and that again is something that is really, really valuable as a message to get over when you're trying to influence somebody about where you want to take the project to the next level. Impacts on partners. It could be that you've actually developed some really strong relationships that you didn't have before, and by working collaboratively with other community groups or other stakeholders, you've then been able to increase your profile. You've had people, organisations that speak on your behalf and increase your visibility. Impacts on groups and impacts on communities. Again, a positive impact on the community is a consequence of what's happened. So this, if you can get that data and demonstrate that information, and we'll talk about there's some really good ways of doing that, you're really, really going to get a story, a picture over to the people that you want to influence. And when you're collecting data, there is qualitative as well as quantitative. The quantitative data, as we know, is easy to say is bums on seats, participation, hard numbers. And the qualitative data is the data that we like to be able to capture, and that is the, as again, the perceptions, the changes in attitudes, changes in behaviours, the way people think, responses. So there's a lot of information that you can gather, stories, that's qualitative data, that you can collect and put into an evaluation and be able to use that evidence as you wish at the end of the project. Evaluating community projects measures the journey. And if you could quite easily, if you remember the explanation of what project evaluation is, talked about ongoing and completed projects. You can go in at the end of the project and you can try and do backward, I call backward evaluation, go back and look at the participation data, perhaps go back and interview people at the end about what they must have thought in their journey, which is good enough. But what if you could measure that journey from the beginning? So you can get initial information about how people are at the time, what their perceptions are, what their attitudes are, how they participate, what your partner's expectations are, what your own expectations are. And then as you go through the course of the project, you can measure again, ask those questions again, one way or another, and you can see the change, and that's the measuring of the journey till you get to the end, and then you've got that summative. And then in a community projects, you'll have short-term, those quick outcomes that you'll get. Then you have medium terms, which may be you do a short course, and then the medium term is that you'll get a qualification. And then a long-term outcome may be that these people will go on to university or something like that, but you won't know in the time frame of that project because you've just taken them from getting involved in short course programs to the idea of thinking about doing a qualification. And so you'll be looking at short, medium and long-term outcomes, but you may not have the opportunity to measure the long-term outcome within any funding. But as I mentioned with the example of the projects that run in cycles of say 5 years, you might, if you set up the foundations by doing the evaluation around short and medium term outcomes, then you will be able to look back in 5 years and perhaps finish off that evaluation process so that you'll be able to identify some long-term outcomes, and those long-term outcomes will mean that you've been able to measure the whole of the journey. Okay, so what are the benefits of evaluation? Well, they do actually evaluation assist in the planning, frame and reviewing of the project. Planning, delivery, efficiency. As you've gone along, what changes have had to be made. And, you know, under your review, you'll be able to find out why that change is happening, why you've had to change the project. Essential for continuous improvement, again, as you're actually progressing through the project and you're getting feedback and you listen to that feedback may be constructive, or it might be saying to you, hey guys, you're going in the wrong direction. So you'll be able to then use the information that you're collecting to make some changes that will make sure that your project not just stays on track, but actually the way it's delivered might improve, the way that you're connecting with your community might improve because of the information that you have been collecting along the way. Evaluation actually provides new insights and information, and this is, you know, the joy of learning. We're not just talking about individuals learning, but we're talking about learning in terms of processes. Or could be learning in terms of your expectations of what a community or people in the community might look like and their priorities, when in fact you find out that there's new insights. One insight that we came across was we promoted a barbecue, and we were told don't put flyers into letterboxes because people just think it's junk mail. For a reason, we did just that. We actually were quite creative in the flyers, and we made the flyers look humorous so people would look at them. But actually, the feedback that we got, which is part of evaluation, was that these people did like junk mail because they came from a community that liked to compare supermarket prices week to week. So if we hadn't have used that some feedback techniques, we wouldn't have known that. And we found that out because people did come along, and then we asked them about how they found out, and they told us. So again, that was a process that we put in place, and that gave us some insights into this community. We also got information about the community as well, because there was a level of trust that started to happen. Evaluation can strengthen and enrich the project and its outcomes. Because we're getting data, and whatever that data may look like, and we can actually stand up and actually say, confident in the knowledge that what we're saying is correct, that that this is happening. This is when departments and organisations and stakeholders actually take notice. Because on the one hand, they ask, you know, where's the data? But then when you'll be able to actually not just give the data, but tell the story, confident that you've got that information behind you, they're quick to listen, because it's a different way. It's people like, at the end of the day, they like the emotion, they like the story, and if you can prove it, then you're going to get heard, basically. Evaluation celebrates success. Because you know how you got from A to B, and you can actually use that to celebrate the outcomes of your project. So you can again invite stakeholders, invite the key people out there that you want to listen to the message that you have to give, and celebrate that success, and be safe in the knowledge that you've carried out some evaluation that actually articulates how successful you were. And of course, evaluation measures change in the community, change in the organisation, change for individuals. And when we talk about change, we talk about change in a number of ways. So impact, again, I mentioned earlier, impact could be the consequence of the change that you've put in place. That's where you can get some really good stories out there. Take that data and look a step further. When you look at relevance, you know, were you relevant to the community? Was there really a need in the community? we've all got some ideas of the projects we want to run, and data may be there, but did we do enough research in the first place? Did we actually get enough connections in the community who could actually sort of not just tell us, but it could actually carry out the project, and we would know that we were doing what the community needed or wanted. So were we relevant? Efficacy is basically, did we have the capacity to run this project? Did we have the right systems in place? And that's an interesting one, especially when you talk about partnerships, for example. We might not have had the right partners in place. And that, I've seen a number of times when projects have started off with this number of partners, these partners, and then as the project has progressed, the partners have changed, and the number of the partners have changed, and what some partners were expecting to do may have had agendas. So that's one way of is saying, look, next time the mix will look different, or this is how it worked for us. Effectiveness, to what extent are your targets being met? Efficiency, is this initiative worthwhile? In terms of resources and time, is it returning? Is it actually is it worthwhile for us? And then the sustainability is about lasting change. Is this, and you see this a lot, especially when you're applying for grants, that they'll say, is there a change? Is a sustainable change? What's it going to look like? Is it going to lead to sustainable change? And you say yes every time, and give an idea what that sustainable change may look like. But when you evaluate it, you'll be able to see whether those promises were real, and what needs to happen for that sustainability, what's happened in that change process to be sustainable, because it may be that your project, you may be funded 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, but it actually may take a lot longer than that to create long-term sustainability, long-term sustainable outcomes. So you could be looking at saying this is a foundation and we need to build on this. So again, it's measuring the effectiveness of the long-lasting change. Okay, so if you were to sit down and evaluate, how would you go about that? Now, first of all, what you would sit down and is you look at, you determine the key questions that you want to ask about how effective your project has been. Going back on some of those ideas we put out there about efficiency, about social change, about your partners. There's a number of things you can start asking about that you want to ask specifically about how that project has worked out for your organisation, or for your community partnership, if you're working with others. And I would say, look, you can sit there and you can think of lots of questions that you may want to ask, which are your overarching questions. But two things I would do. I would get your clues from the objectives and outcomes that you put into your project brief, or what you may have put into a funding application if you applied for funding. Start with the outcomes, and then from those outcomes, identify a maximum of 5 or 7 questions. Certainly don't ask too many more, because your evaluation process will become bigger than Ben-Hur. So determine a few key questions that you want to ask. Use some of the ideas that I've already mentioned as ways to frame how you might want to pitch the questions. Then you might want to develop a plan. And the plan may have the following headings. Based on those questions, what do you need to know? what you will measure, how you will measure it, so the tools that you will use, and we'll talk about those. Okay, when you will measure that, and who will measure each evaluation activity. So it could be that you may want to know, for example, what I'm just thinking off the top of my head, was there a need for this youth project? Okay, and you probably say what it was you were doing. Okay, so what you will do there is you'll measure and you'll think, well, okay, so you want to know what was there a need. What you might measure is the engagement in the project. Okay, from the youth. As one, you can think of about 3 or 4 things that you might want to measure from that one question. But you might say, you know, we'll measure youth engagement. We might measure youth. So then you think, well, how are we going to look at their engagement in the project? And you might say, okay, so we might want to do the tools, and we might say we want to do a survey. Okay. We might also want to look at them and say we want to look at doing some focus groups with them. You could be, for instance, having some one-on-one interviews with perhaps the youth leaders, not necessarily the young people themselves, but you might actually want to talk to some leaders that might have been involved in the project. So, and you might do that as interviews with youth leaders. So there's 3 different tools that we might have used just for that one, what you'll measure. We talked about surveys, focus group, and interviews with different stakeholders. That's how you'll measure. Then when you will measure, you might actually think, okay, so we might want to talk to these young people, or we might do a survey of young people at the beginning of the project, the benchmark phase. And they might not even have thought about having this project or the idea of it, and you'll find that they might not be interested. And then as you put things out there and activities out there, you may be able to ask them again a little bit later on, and you'll find that they will suddenly their attitudes may have changed, and they may be involved in the project, and then later on they get to the very end of it and it's the best thing that's ever happened to them. So, and at the same time, youth leaders will be able to give their thoughts on how people's attitudes have changed. They might not specifically mention somebody, but there again, there may be somebody in that group who you can then say, we'll use these people as a case study. So there might be somebody who perhaps was a little bit of a social outcast who got involved in this project, and at the end of it they flourished, they became a popular person, and they were able to, because they were artistic or something, so you can then be able to use them as a case study. So again, you know, was there a need for this youth project? And along the way you put in some tools and some processes that will show that yes, there was a need for this project. So when you will measure that, as I said, we can talk about beginning and different times in the projects and activities that you're going to deliver during that during the project. You'll be able to say, okay, we're going to have a youth band or something happening at this point, so let's do something here. So you can actually tie up the kind of research that you want to do with the activities that are happening in the course of your project. So you're not trying to do an evaluation at odds with what's going on at the time. You want to take the opportunity to match everything with what's happening. So, and again, who will measure each evaluation activity? Who will do it? So that if you've got it could be just one person that maybe just because it's got to be objective, just deciding that they're going to do this, this, and this. Or it could be that you may have perhaps it might be a disco with the police involved. So you might have somebody, the youth worker may be the person who does that part of evaluation. So that's just an example of, could be a variation of the partners or your project team who do different parts of the evaluation process. And that's when you cross-reference with the delivery plan and to identify those milestones along the way. And when you're thinking about evaluation, you're thinking about benchmark data. We've mentioned this, to get the information right at the beginning. For instance, any hard data about participation, people's perceptions, their attitudes, their behaviours, and the conditions. And then as you work through the project, you're then looking at anything that's you're measuring during the course of the project will become your formative evidence, and then right at the end of the project's evaluation period, you can do some final evidence collection, and that's called your summative evidence. So you have systematically collected and measured the change that's happened along the course of the project. Look, when I talk about tools, I think we mentioned the ones that we talk most obvious to choose from. I use surveys, and if you are going to do surveys, be consistent. So if you're going to be a survey at different points of the project, make sure that you are asking the same questions so that you're getting the same kind of responses. Likert scales, the scale's 1 out of 10, and that's usually good for measuring attitudes and what people's perceptions and thoughts are. You could back them up then with some, given the opportunity to describe. But just for the measuring in terms of data, then Likert scales are good, say 1 out of 10, 2 out of 5, etc. Interviews are good, and they certainly are good at interviewing stakeholders, getting information from them. Again, try and be consistent in the questions that you're asking across the different people that you're interviewing. Interviewing are also get down to direct people with specific viewpoints, etc. Focus groups are really good to bring groups of people in. Again, you're looking at perceptions, you're looking at feedback, certainly feedback, and the strength of a focus group is that you can put questions out there, but you're not required to direct these people. You give these people the space to be able to give you the feedback that you are looking for. Might not be the information, it's exactly what you're looking for, but it'll give you a good insight as to the feedback from these groups that you're looking at. Data, yes, good old data, in whatever way that looks like. Minutes, project documents, meetings. They're also good because they can actually look at the way the project's been run, the efficacy, the efficiency, the continuous improvement processes. They demonstrate the way that the project is being monitored and adapted as you go along. So minutes and notes of all meetings and diaries even are good evaluation tools. Mentioned earlier, case studies. Fantastic if you're actually when you're thinking about what you're going to do at the end of the project and you want to demonstrate some of the strengths, weaknesses, etc. of your project. Collect some case studies as you go along. Those case studies might not become evident until later into the project, especially if you're talking with people, because it can be quite affronting if people think they're going to be a case study right at the beginning. But you will be able to identify later on and get people to tell their stories. And telling their stories actually puts a personification, the emotion, and you'll be able to show people and if you video these case studies or you may do a story of this, a story or a report, it actually brings a bit of life to the project. Storytelling, as I mentioned, is really good. One way to do that is a process called Most Significant Change, where you get to the end of the project after 2 or 3 years, if it's a long one, get people to tell their stories, and then you'll be able to see if there's a common thread. And if it's a common thread, then you'll be able to look into that a little bit further. But storytelling is a really good and powerful way to collect information for the evaluation. And then the other one that we mentioned is collaboration charts. Now, collaboration charts, I'm using here in the context of partnerships, but I've actually used collaboration charts for processes and stuff like that. So it's the principle that I really want to show you today. And if you look at the left-hand column, the left-hand picture, in this particular project, there were 4 key partners with the project. There was the school, the library, the gym, and the farmers market. It was a healthy options project. And what we found there was, at the beginning of the project, there really was no connection with the farmers market, but it was the project wanted to create that link with the farmers market because it was looking at healthy eating, etc. And there was a bit of a tentative relationship with the gym. A relationship was happening between the project and the library, but there was a very strong connection with the school. And these connections are denoted by lines or the absence of lines in the case of the project and farmers market. And it's a visual tool, so you can actually do the same thing in the middle of the project and then again at the end of the project. And at the end of this particular project, interestingly enough, the school connection with the project was very strong. The gym, there was a connection there, but the library connection with the project hadn't changed, but there had been a strong connection made with the farmers market. Now this is a visual tool and you can see straight on, and you can back this up with other information and other evidence in the evaluation process as to what that relationship with the farmers market was, how it happened, so that you can then be able to replicate that in the future. But it's a good indicator, a visual indicator, and shows you the change that's happened in relation to the partnerships over the length of the project. Now this is my favourite part of evaluation in terms of thinking about what it is that you want to do with the evaluation when you get to the end of it. Now, for me, the passion comes out of groups who say that they jump through hoops, put together an evaluation report, it then goes to a government funding body, and as to all intents and purposes, they just think it's just left on the shelf. That's how they see it, as a linear process. They do the evaluation, they do the report, it gets put in and it goes on the shelf. What they don't think about is actually what else they can do with this information that they've put together. So it doesn't mean that the evaluation stops by going to a contracted arrangement. What about considering your audience, different audience? Especially if you want to be able to use this information I don't know, to promote how good you are, or you may want to look at a different funding stream. So yes, you've got the document. You may do a video log. Now, one of the evaluation projects I did, and I came in at the end of the project, so I really didn't have the opportunity to measure any change from the beginning. I really didn't have much to work on, so I actually went back and I interviewed the key. It was the parents returning to learning, so I interviewed the school teachers, I interviewed the students, I interviewed the project staff, and I did this using video. And I created a DVD, which was then used as a tool by the partners to show how successful their project was engaging parents back into learning. So it was put to a different use, as well as we used it as part of the evaluation report. Or you could actually collect the data and even the people along the way and create a presentation and present it to local government or present it to whoever, the community even, about how the projects fared and the changes that it made and the impact in the community. Or create a digital story. And again, think about who your audience is, and it's not just a contractual audience, it's about who else can you influence to take your project to the next stage, or to show the stories. It could be that you take it to a conference, and therefore you're going to wow people with data, with stories, with video, and you're safe and confident that this is information that you've collected. Think about the style, the language, and the simplicity of what you're presenting. You don't want to present something that's really overly complicated and there's too many tables. In fact, I've seen it where funding bodies said we don't want lots and lots of tables, but you've done a lot of work. So my recommendation has always been keep the document itself simple if it's a document, your summary, your content, your methodology, your findings, and a few key bits of data and what looks good. But keep the rest of it, put it as an appendix to your report. And even if the audience doesn't read it, if you keep it like that in your organisation, then somebody's going to come along in the future and all the information is there in one spot. Again, think about the way it's presented, contents, headings, subheadings, tables and graphs. Quotes are good as well, and also, you know, put in some case studies. I certainly like to throw in a few sections here and there with a picture or two, just to of the stories from the community that are relevant to this section of the evaluation that I'm writing. So it brings the report to life a little bit, it humanises it, and so that it becomes interesting to read. Okay, so let's do a recap. 5 reasons why you must evaluate your community projects. And the first one was to check you've achieved what you set out to achieve, and if not, why not? The second was to show the change that your project brought to your community, to your target audience, project partners, because it's required by your funding body or management. That's the third step. Or the fourth reason is you want to access more funding after the project ends. And of course, you don't want people to forget what your project achieved. So what happens if you don't evaluate? Well, you don't make the right changes to keep the project on track. You could be letting your team down by not being able to provide evidence feedback on the project's performance. How do you know what's changed and why? You won't be able to prove to other people the difference your project made. This is the story about going back, and I've even said, so a project may finish at the end of the financial year, and I've said to them the day after, prove it. And then say, well, you won't have the evidence base to back up your next funding submission. And say, woefully, I came across that, and it was could have been so different had they done some evaluation for the project that they had previously had. Okay, so some of you will have experience in evaluating projects, but for others, it's a good idea, but are you sure you've got the right answers covered, questions covered? Do you have a planned framework for your evaluation? We mentioned, you know, what are the questions, what needs to be done, how you'll measure, what you'll measure, when you'll measure. It's a simple framework. What tools you're going to use for your project? Who's going to gather the evidence and when? Can you not afford to evaluate your projects? It's you know, it can be quite costly. It can be anything up to 10% of your project funding. Or do you need help? Okay, so I've asked the question here: who's ready to take the project management skills to the next level? We're going to offer you a 5-module online training program, which is covering the areas of the fundamentals of project evaluation. So look at some of the information I've given you today, but to actually to explore that, we'll have some templates and checklists for you to look at. We'll then take you to exploring your project outcomes and develop your key questions. So we're going to work as a team here, and you will have a project that you may have, or we'll invent one for you, and we'll take you through that process of looking at what are the key questions that you might want to ask in a project evaluation. And then the third step will be then putting together the framework plan and what that looks like. The fourth stage then we'll be looking at the fourth module, the evaluation tools. We'll be looking at the kinds of evaluation tools that are out there, and believe me, I can think of at least 25 different tools. So we'll be able to find the right tool for what you want to do. And then positioning your project evaluation for the future. And this again is looking at, well, when you get towards the end of the project and you realise that the information and data that's coming from this might lead to this opportunity, or you want to showcase it. So we'll look at your project, we'll look at the evaluation and then the evidence that's coming forward, and as I said, we could do this as a scenario, and we were looking at, well, how then would you then focus this on taking your project to the next stage. So what we want to offer you is these 5 online training webinars, and we're going to add some bonuses because we'll actually also add 3 months of email support to answer your real life evaluation questions. So if you may be doing this as a live exercise during the 5 webinars, that's fine, or it could be a simulation, but what we'll do then is say to you, okay, so we want to take this further, and everybody will get a 3 months opportunity for us to support you to put together your real life evaluation. And we'll also, as a bonus, throw in some project evaluation templates and checklists. Can you do this any other way? Well, yes, you can. You can register for a project management training course, but when you get the access to real life support that we're offering you. You can attend a project evaluation workshop, which there's plenty of them around, but what about the follow-up? You can develop your own evaluation process or borrow one from the internet, but will you know enough to own the process? Or you could buy an evaluation expertise, and that will cost money. So yes, you can do these, but what we're offering you is a 5-week module program with these extra bonuses that would cost you at $6.97. But we're saying to you, okay, as an introductory offer, which is again the 5 modules, 3 month support, templates and checklists, we'll do that for $487, which is a 30% discount. And we're going to do this guarantee, actually, we said next 3 to 5 days until the first training program is full, because we're going to look at full places limited to 12, and we're actually going to put this out across different networks. So look, it's if you know me, you know that I'd like to work with you. We like to give you more value, and we certainly want to personalise and make this evaluation fit your real life needs. And we're so confident that we'll throw in a 30-day risk-free guarantee. So if you're not happy, we'll refund all your money. And look, Evaluating for Success project evaluation training program, it's $487. You can go to the communityentrepreneur.com evaluation, or you can contact us at support@thecommunityentrepreneur.com. And look, if this is too much for you right now, we do offer evaluation services, because there is a lot of mental energy, there is a lot of time and costs associated with this, and you are very busy people. So we can support you to put together an evaluation plan, or we can develop some tools with you or for you. We can do a mentoring coaching program, and also we can offer one-day workshops for groups or for networks, or we could actually do the whole thing for you. So again, you know, just go to communityentrepreneur.com/evaluation, contact us at the support@thecommunityentrepreneur.com, and we'll be most happy to provide the support that you need when you need it. Okay, so look, thank you. We do have a range of services that we offer. We certainly have a grant writing session that we can offer networks. We can come along and do a 1.5-hour presentation. All we ask is that you provide the venue, provide the people, usually across your networks, and we'll come along and do that for you for free. But in the meantime, you can find us at www.thecommunityentrepreneur.com, and we're also on Facebook. And Karen, are there any questions? Okay then, so thank you for your time.